Hello and welcome to these maths tutorials with TB Tutor. In this video, we will be looking at equations of curves. A quadratic graph is any graph which has an equation that includes a variable raised to the power 2, x squared for example. We draw them in a very similar way to straight line graphs, and will need to substitute values into the equation. To draw the graph of the equation y equals x squared minus 2, we need to complete a table relating x and y values. We substitute each x value in turn into the equation to calculate their corresponding y values. We now consider each xy point in the above table as coordinates to be plotted against x and y axes. Once we have plotted all the points in the table, we can now draw the curved line through the points. Plot the curve of the equation y equals minus 0.5x squared plus x plus 9. Substituting each x value in turn into the equation, we get We can now plot all the new points and redraw the curve. Consider the equation y equals x squared plus x plus 1. The constant value determines where the curve crosses the y-axis. In this case, it is 1. Changing the constant to a value of minus 1 moves the curve down to cross the y-axis at minus 1. Changing the sign of the coefficient of x, for example from 1 to minus 1, mirrors the curve about the y-axis. Increasing the absolute value of the coefficient of x, for example from minus 1 to minus 3, moves the curve further from the y-axis and moves the curve down the x-axis but retains the curve shape. Changing the sign of the coefficient of x squared, for example from 1 to minus 1, mirrors the curve about the y-axis and a horizontal axis through the point where the curve crosses the y-axis, but retains the curve shape. Changing the absolute value of the coefficient of x squared, for example from minus 1 to minus 2, changes the shape of the curve. A cubic graph is any graph which has an equation that includes a variable raised to the power 3, x cubed for example. Like quadratic graphs, they are curved but have two changes of direction instead of one. As before, we draw them by substituting values for x in the equation. Plot the curve of the equation y equals 0.25 x cubed minus x plus 2. Substituting each x value in turn into the equation, we get We can now plot all the new points and redraw the curve. Equations with terms including x raised to a power such as x squared and x cubed are known as polynomials. The indices on the x terms are not always positive values. For example, in the equation below, y equals x raised to the minus 1, the curve of this equation looks like this. The coefficient of x at the moment is 1. If we make this minus 1, the curve is mirrored about the x-axis. If we decrease the index from minus 1 to minus 2, we have a curve shape that looks like this. Finally, if we decrease the index from minus 2 to minus 3, we have a curve shape similar to that when it was -1. Exponential graphs are graphs in the form of the equation below, where k is a constant. These graphs increase rapidly in the y direction and will never fall below the x-axis. Y equals k raised to the x. Substituting a value of 2 for k, the curve of the equation looks like this. The coefficient of x at the moment is 1. If we make this -1, the curve is mirrored about the x-axis. Curved graphs can be used to solve equations. The points at which the curve crosses a particular line on the graph are the solutions to the equation. To solve the equation x squared plus x minus 3 equals -1, we need to look at where the curve crosses a horizontal axis passing through y equals -1. Drawing a horizontal line at y equals -1, we can see it crosses the curve at the axis values of -2 and 1. Thank you for watching this tutorial. If you have found it useful, please like and subscribe to see more content.